C'est toujours un plaisir.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's always a pleasure to be here at the Regional Development Committee to present what we do at the European Court of Auditors.
Very grateful to you and all the honorable members for this invitation. Before I start, I would like to apologize to those that have been already members, and maybe I will say things that you already know. But nevertheless, I will do my best in these short 20 minutes to cover an immense amount of work and topics, starting from one side, the compliance and legality and regularity of the European spending, and moving on to performance and other special reports that we produce in the court. So allow me just to say in the beginning a few words about how we organize ourselves. The court has delegated most of the work, as many of you know, in 5 chambers. Each chamber has around 5 members and is responsible for a defined area of EU activity and spending. I'm responsible, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, for the regional development and employment area, which we often refer to as cohesion. Other chambers, for example, agriculture, Chamber 1, or spending outside of the EU, Chamber 3, cover different policy areas, and you could see that we cover 3 of the 5 European structural and investment funds, and in our policy areas, significant spending is involved. We do, as I mentioned, 2 types of audit in the chamber. Compliance audit is about checking whether the EU spending has been in line with the relevant rules. Performance audit goes beyond that, can look, for example, whether the spending delivered what was intended, whether it was done at a reasonable cost, and ultimately whether it has improved the lives of the European citizens. We also publish non-audit products, opinions on proposed legislation, reviews which do not contain new audit judgments, but I will say a little bit more on each of these products later when we move on in the presentation. Looking first at compliance audit, as you started, Mr. Chair, at the annual report, the results of our audits are published each year in this annual exercise. Therefore, our results for 2018 were just published last month. This is the famous Statement of Assurance, or the so-called DAS. And our chamber is responsible in Chapter 6 about the legality and regularity spending in cohesion. We have a dedicated reporting member. It is not myself, it is our colleague, the Irish member, Tony Murphy, who will be actually presenting the findings of Chapter 6 to the Cont Committee next week. So I will be more general at this stage, since there will be really a detailed presentation by the reporting member next week. But from what you can see on the slide, you can notice that the error rate, the proportion of spending which does not comply with the rules, was 5% for 2018. It is higher than both the overall rate across the whole of the EU budget and higher than the previous year, as you rightly noticed, Mr. Chair. The main reason for this tends to be the beneficiaries in member states claiming for ineligible projects or ineligible expenditures. And one of the things we think could help to reduce the error rate as well as the administrative burden is simplifying some of the rules involved. I will just mention at this stage that we in Chamber 2 have been piloting a new approach to our compliance audit for the last 2 years, known as Attestation Audit. The main aspect of this is that we try to put more assurance on the work of other organizations involved in the spending process, notably the audit authorities in the member states and the Commission itself. It is quite technical, so at this stage I will stop on the annual report and Chapter 6, but this is just a general snapshot that I wanted to present to you. These maps are taken from the annual reports. I would just like to show them to you to give you an idea about the work involved. There are two maps because here, this particular year, we cover two periods of spending, 7-13 and 14-20. Obviously, there is a lot of information here, but the key point is that the 220 individual transactions that we examine come from across different member states. Where necessary, and this may depend on the quality of the work done by the other players that I just mentioned, we will follow the EU money just right down to the level of recipient in the different member states. But just a word of caution, our compliance audit is designed to provide a conclusion for the EU budget as a whole, for the policy area as a whole. So here you will not find the individual error rate per member state. I know this is a very interesting question and we are very often asked about it, but we're not in a position to make conclusions about these individual error rates for the individual member states. There is much more work that needs to be carried out in order to draw a statistically valid conclusion for individual member state error rate. Now allow me to turn to the performance part. Here we can choose our subjects where we think our work will have most impact based on different criteria. On this slide, I just listed a few, indeed a few of the special reports that we have published in the last year or so. And you can see we have covered a good variety of topics, from public-private partnerships to broadband, regulation, absorption. In the transport area, quite a few reports on high-speed rail, passenger rights, wind and solar power. I just recently presented to the ITRE committee. I personally am leading an audit on urban mobility that is due to be published next year. And while a good deal of EU money is available for this important topic, it is very much up to the cities around Europe how they make use of this funding. So we have shared management and much more challenges, of course, compared to the horizontal programs, especially on the performance side. I mentioned here one of the other challenges that we have, the 13-month target. What is this? This is the compliance that we need to address with the length of our reports, which is in the financial regulation now. And according to this legislation, we have a fixed maximum of 13 months, which is certainly a challenge for us, Mr. Chair, particularly for a chamber like ours, where share management is the norm. And as I just said, most of our audits involve work at member state level. We could choose, of course, not to visit the member states, but our reports would be much thinner and less interesting if that were the case. And this inevitably takes considerable time and effort to arrange and carry out. However, we're working very hard to meet this target. As I said earlier, not all our products are audit reports. We also issue, when requested, opinions, and even when we're not requested, reviews and briefing papers. There is, of course, a mechanism in the EU legislation whereby the legislative authorities, including the Parliament, of course, can ask for our opinion on legislation that has been proposed by the Commission. An example of last year, such a request from last year was the opinion which I led on the Commission proposal for the Common Provision Regulation. It is a bit old now because a lot has happened after, but nevertheless I've included a slide with the findings and recommendations that we issued at the time the opinion was published, but I will say a few more words in a moment about it. In the last few years also we have begun to publish other special products, so-called review products with varying scopes. They do not contain audit judgments, Mr. Chair. They are not audit reports. Whatever the definition of audit report is, they don't have specific recommendations or audit judgments, but they present information on topical themes in an accessible way for the stakeholders. And we believe they could be useful, especially in the sense of the timing, when they are presented to help the decision makers to take the right decision. Examples of reviews from this year, again, which I led, are an examination into how cohesion policy fund resources are allocated to member states. This is the so-called pre-allocation of cohesion funds, a rapid case review published earlier this year, and the extent to which the design and implementation of cohesion policy focuses on performance. This is the most recent, fresh paper that we published on performance and cohesion, so I also intend to say a few words on it a little bit later. So, starting with the opinion that I said was a bit old, but nevertheless, it covered an extensive range of the draft legislation, a series of rules which would apply to a number of structural investment funds. And of course, the opinion itself was similarly extensive, very technical, very long, but nevertheless, I recommend to those who are interested to read it. We conclude on the few major elements of this draft piece of legislation, starting with simplification. There we conclude, as I mentioned earlier, that this is generally, of course, a good thing, but simplifying rules can present risks in terms of both compliance and also sound financial management. What I mean exactly is performance. So we have really to keep a good balance between simplification and keeping the control and good reporting, which is important for performance. In managing also a 7-year budget, flexibility is important. The Commission is proposing 2-stage programming with a clear break after 5 or 7 years. This may increase the EU's ability to respond to changing circumstances, but some of the processes that we observed need clarification, and we are concerned at the level of the administration involved. The next very important point that we discussed with you, Mr. Chair, yesterday was the alignment between EU funding and the EU priorities. This is something on which we have commented a number of times. And while some steps have been taken, such a stronger link between the use of funding and the European semester, we think that especially the absence of an EU-wide high-level strategy to succeed the European 2020 strategy is a major omission. Maybe a strategy will come in the future, but the funding would have been already decided. And this is where we have serious concern. And finally, on accountability, just a few words. The proposal tends to shift this responsibility for implementation more to member states, reducing the role of the Commission. And here we see that some of the arrangements may expose the EU to increased risks. This is very much in brief on this opinion, which I said is quite long and technical paper, but very interesting. Now, let me turn to one of the review products. As I mentioned earlier, this is the allocation of cohesion policy funding to member states for 21-27. Now, don't get shocked by this picture. The intention is not to explain it and to understand it right now, but just to show how complicated it is. It is indeed a very complicated process, and the aim of this review was to help stakeholders to understand the rationale behind the processes, how they operate. Of course, we acknowledge that the Commission has been much more transparent compared to previous periods, publishing its proposals in the CPR legislation that I mentioned earlier, but still it is very difficult to understand, even for us. For myself as reporting member, it was a challenge to understand the process and then to translate it in an understandable way to explain it. So we hope that this review, it is not as long as the opinion on the CPR, it is a shorter paper, but very interesting. It will help, especially in this timing, the decision makers, especially the Parliament, to take more informed decisions. Here you can see the effect of the Commission proposals for the different member states. Of course, this is not a new information. This is just an illustration. We have some new elements in the new proposal. We have caps, safety nets that limit the divergence between the current and the next period. We have 6 member states that will receive, of course, based on the proposal, the same amount of cohesion policy funding. There are some significant variations for others. There are new elements in place, such as migration, climate change. So there are new things and improvements, but as I said, the bottom line is that it is still complicated. That may give the impression that it's not fully transparent, but the improvement is there compared to the previous period. Now, in the second review that we published, that is more fresh, recently published, we looked at the extent to which the cohesion policy reflects performance and not just compliance. The main basis for our work here was all the different special reports that we have published in the last decade. In the last 10 years, 69 reports in total, in all different policy areas, from transport to social to infrastructure, many reports indeed. And to structure this work, we broke the full implementation cycle into 5 stages, as you can see from the slide, from strategic planning through to evaluation. We then identified 14 guiding principles, which we believe are key to making sure that the EU spending is geared towards performance. Of these 14 principles, 13 are spread over the 5 stages, and the last one is more horizontal. It is related to sustainability and, of course, is cross-cutting by its nature. We assessed, in the next slide you will see, using a traffic lights rating, which is easier and more visual to see the progress that was made comparing the 7-13 and the 14-20 period, and looking just at the design phase, of course, of the 21-27 period. And we compared the extent to which these principles were being adhered. You can see by the colors that there's a clear improvement between the first and the last period. Most of the red in the first period has gone, but you can also see that actually the improvements have happened between 7-13 and 14-20 in the middle column, and there is little or no improvement between the second and the third columns. And this finding is actually consistent with our opinion on the CPR that I spoke about earlier. This was not limited to performance aspects, but its overall message was similar, that the momentum for improvement shown in 14-20 might not be carried forward into the next period. I hope we are proven wrong, but that is our conclusions based on this extensive 10-year work, as I mentioned, in the 69 special reports. And just I will say a few words about the 2 principles which we assessed in red for the 21-27 period, because I think it is important. The improvements are clear, we acknowledge them, we appreciate them, but these are 2 very important elements, and guiding principle 1 is actually the most important message I think I want to convey to you, which is about the need for a strategic vision to guide the spending. When I was talking earlier about our opinion on the CPR, I mentioned that we had pointed to the absence of a successor to the EU 2020 strategy. And that is the main reason why we judged that there had been a slip back from this principle, from yellow to red. We also took account, of course, of the fact that the EU continues to work to a range of different objectives, sometimes competing, sometimes rarely aligned. These include the 7-year MFF program period, separate Commission priorities, such as the Juncker plan from a few years ago, external commitments, such as sustainable development goals, So a lot of goals spread here and there, but not a single coherent strategic vision with measurable targets for the future, for the moment. And guiding principle 9 considers when programs are revised. The risk here is that member states' programs might be revised with no consideration given to the impact on performance. The legislative framework for 1420 was strengthened through the introduction of the need to justify changes to programs in terms of achieving objectives together with the rules regarding changes to certain indicators. And for 21-27, I mentioned earlier that the Commission has proposed a mandatory midterm exercise in 2025, amending all programs for the last 2 years of the period. However, it is not clear how performance will be assessed in this exercise, as member states will be able to make significant transfers of funds without approval, increasing the risk that changes will be made with no consideration of results. And this point is an example of the tension that often exists between member states' desire to spend the money available and the need to ensure that spending, of course, leads to positive results for the citizens. Now, this is very much in brief for the current work that we are doing, and here just some brief information about the reports that are in the pipeline that will be coming from Chamber 2 in the coming months and years. You can see, of course, the annual report is our annual exercise. We will have a special performance exercise, a new one from next year, but for the performance reports, you will see subjects as transport flagships, urban mobility, as I mentioned, cultural investments, roads connecting European regions, child poverty, this is more on the social fund, digitizing European industry, I'm a reporting member myself for this one. This is the famous Industry 4.0, a very, very interesting subject, and the cross-border programs. This is for the year 2020. And for the year to follow, we have also a full list of interesting subjects that you can see from this slide. I hope I managed to cover within the time limit all the topics, and now I'm looking forward really to your questions and comments. Thank you very much.